You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Have you ever struggled with nailing your hiring process to get the best performers for your organization or your team? Well, today I've got a gentleman who's going to describe some best practices for getting that done in a much more productive way. His name is Aaron Salko. Aaron, welcome to the show.
How you doing, Doug? Good to be here.
Doing well. Glad to have you. Aaron and I had to play a little tag getting this thing done. It's been a while. It's been in the queue, but I've always said that when I see that going with my guests, usually the shows turn out to be amazing. And no pressure there, Aaron, but
we'll try our best.
We'll get it cranked up. I always like to ask guests, give us a little bit of backstory of your journey on what it was that got you into what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a very small town in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, north of Scranton, if anybody's familiar with that. And parents were baby boomers, hard workers. Work was what they did, as anybody knows the background of a baby boomer. And my mom was a teacher and a creative. My dad was this master's degree in psychology and a serial entrepreneur. So there were a lot of Jedi mind tricks played in our house growing up. And we owned a little restaurant, and work was what we did. I'd come home after school every day, and I'd wash dishes before the child labor laws were enforced. And I did it because I wanted to fit in, because work was what we did. And when I didn't get that acknowledgement, because work is a part of life to my parents, I worked harder, and that carried me through my high school, where I captained many of my sports teams, into college, where I fell in love with everything human biology and physiology related, and of course always dabbled in psychology due to my dad, but understood at a very young age, when I wanted to make sports teams, that my personal performance was critical to making those sports teams, to achieving those goals that I wanted. And so I applied a lot of the science of the human element to it, and that brought me into my career, where I started in sports medicine, physical therapy, and then I got out of that due to just an influx, and I had a lot of student loans at the time, and it wasn't paying the bills, and I got into this organization called Stephen Gould Corporation. Great organization. They allowed me to perform a role as a global sales entrepreneur. So it was a very open-ended type of operation where we revolved around packaging, but it was very entrepreneurial based. And I didn't know anything about that. And so what I do, I applied my knowledge of performance to that career. And I studied the high performers in my organization and outside of my organization, and I learned and applied and learned and applied, and I got really good at the job. And one day I was around some cohorts. I had joined some networking groups, and somebody who I really respected called me out in a meeting and said, "Aaron, you're a high performer. What would you do in this situation?" And always looking for that acknowledgement. I was like, "Wow, there it is." High performer, Aaron Salko, here I am, right? And that felt really, really great for about 5 seconds because I felt my ego go through the roof. And I began to reflect, and I said, this person called me a high performer, but what criteria did they use to give me that label? Who's the governing body of high performance? And did they just set me up for failure? Because now I think I've arrived and I don't have to perform at any higher level. And I'm sure we've all done that. Everybody that is listening, we've all called somebody a high performer. And we've done it maybe out of habit or because we like that person. But truly, that label is a profound label. And what it does to the human psyche can be challenging. And so that was the day, and that was, 15 years ago, yeah, about that, where I said, this isn't good enough. We need to uncover what high performance, this elusive word, really means and define it. And we also need to build tools to measure it so that people who want it can follow a pathway to get it. And so that's what we did. And it took us a long, long time with a ton of trial and error and studies and validating in the fields that I played in. And we came up with this framework for what true human performance looks like. And as a human performance strategist, everything revolves around mindset too, Doug. You know this as well as anybody. And mindset is one of those things that is not easily achieved. And actually, a negative mindset is probably more easily achieved than a positive mindset. As I say, the conscious brain directs and the subconscious brain obeys, and it'll look for all the negative in our environment. So that's a big part of what we do too.
That's great. And you've created this platform called the Ninth Stratum. Can you just give us a quick summary of what those indicators are and what that platform's about?
Sure. So the framework around the Ninth Stratum really started with defining, what true high performance is, and so that others could understand it. And so we define it, you won't find it in Webster's dictionary, but we define it as high performance is the daily pursuit of excellence in all aspects of work and life that ultimately result in continued goal achievement and sustained personal success. And it requires the consistent day after day improvement of personal performance, driven by the desire to advance skills, knowledge, and behavior. And that was our starting point. But then we had to really begin to look at high performance in general, and we did what everybody else does, the high performing athletes, Michael Jordan's, the Kobe Bryant's, Tiger Woods. We looked at the business moguls. We looked at high performers in our career and in the organizations that we engaged, and really began to understand that these high performers exuded specific skills that got them to the levels of performance. And so we began to break down these skills. And during that process, we realized that there are career-based skills and there are also what society deems soft skills. And we began to eliminate the career-based skills because we understood that the soft skills drove performance. And all these soft skills came out. And then we took a little pivot. We said, we're doing what everybody else is doing. Let's take a different direction. And we began to look at the low performers, the people who failed, the people who did not achieve what they wanted. And, those skills were more prevalent than anything when you look at why people failed. And so all these new skills came to the table. And we had this big list, and we began to see categories of human performance, because we didn't want this to just be for career. We wanted it to be for career and life. And so we saw these categories across the spectrum of human performance: mentality, cognitive ability, mastery of emotion, social interaction, and personal health. And these are all in the book, by the way. And within each of those categories are specific performance-based skills that follow a critical criteria. They need to be taught, learned, applied, and improved. So it's not a skill like if you're 6 foot, you're a high performer. You have to be able to improve these skills. And so, the lists are there, they're in the categories. And then we said, we need to measure this. Like, how do we measure performance? How do we measure these skills? And we looked at grades, and we looked at, performance reviews, and they just weren't good enough because the grades elicited emotion, and they were like labels. Like, I'm a C student, you're an A student, right? And performance reviews are very subjective. They're like, well, some managers are like, I don't really give 4s. I only give 3s, And why? Well, because I just don't want people thinking they're great. That's not a great reason. And so we looked at how humans actually learn and improve. And so we developed our own. And that's where the 9 stratums of performance came from. And it begins at the first stratum, where generally a lot of these things that we have in life are learned from our environment, and they start out as behaviors such as composure. You know, my dad flies off the handle, my sister flies off the handle, I fly off the handle. We have a temper, right? That's stratum 1, it's a behavior. Stratum 2 is, well, you lack composure. Well, I know I lack composure, but I've always had a temper and I'm always going to have a temper. That's the second stratum. You're aware, but you don't care. Third stratum is when somebody says to you, Aaron, your temper, your lack of composure is really affecting your performance and your staying power here at this organization. Got to fix it. And I go, okay, roger that. That's my aha moment. That's the third stratum. That's when a human goes, okay, I have a deficiency. I've got to move through this. Fourth stratum, I start talking to people. What books do you have to read? Who's the coach that can help me through this? What videos can I watch? So you're gathering the information. And in the fifth stratum, you begin to learn. You're acquiring knowledge now. You're reading the books, you're watching the videos, you're working with the coach. And then you have all this information, and you have to get to that next stratum, which is the sixth stratum, the most difficult stratum, because that's when we have to apply something that we're really not good at. And this, a lot of people get stuck here. They don't want to try it. And I think, the advent of Instagram and social media and everybody's putting all this information out there, I believe that our society is perpetually stuck in the fifth stratum, just learning but never applying. And so the sixth stratum is when you jump off and you try it, and it's going to be messy and you're not going to be good at it, but you're going to try it again and you're going to try it again and you're going to practice. And that gets you to the seventh stratum, where you are practicing and you're getting better and you're more aware when you make a mistake. And that practice leads to the eighth stratum. And this is where we see a lot of the high performers and high potentials hover. Because in the eighth stratum, not only are you're competent, you're consistent, you're very confident in that skill, but you've developed your own internal process. So you know, if it's composure, when you get hit with that bolt of anger, that you know how to take the stimulus, reduce it in your head, go from a lizard brain reaction to an executive function reaction, and be able to control the emotions in the environment, right? You have a process for that. So the only difference between the eighth stratum and the ninth stratum, is where we all want to get to, the ninth stratum, is in the ninth stratum, you can teach your process to others. It's a self-mastery. And in the ninth stratum, you haven't arrived. You're always in the constant pursuit of getting better. But that's where we want to see our performance leaders. That's where the true magic happens.
Fascinating framework. And as you were describing that, a couple of thoughts came to mind, and I'm going to unpack a little bit here. A year or so ago, I had a lady on my show. She was Dr. Ruth Goshen, and she herself, as a PhD, did a big study on the high performers and actually interviewed, 50 of some of the highest performing standards you can think of. She had NASA astronauts that had been on the space station. She had Nobel Prize winners. She had Mount Everest climbers and long distance, high endurance athletes. And she interviewed all these people individually and put this study and book together. But then as the book was launching, she had this giant reception where she invited all these people. And she said the one most fascinating thing that happened at that reception was all the high performers coveted what the other people had. And
Right.
the Nobel Prize guys wanted to go talk to the astronauts, and the astronauts wanted to talk to the mountain climbers, and the mountain climbers wanted to talk to the high endurance athletes. She said it was this amazing
Oh, man.
and somewhat strange dynamic that she totally did not anticipate.
Yeah.
But as she thought about it and processed it, she realized in her work, it sounds very similar to your ninth stratum framework. She discovered there was a mindset that was very dominant in the high performers. And part of it was that desire to continue learning, learn more, be aware, continue to add to what you've got. So she said that's what was driving these people, to want to go touch and talk to the others that
Yeah.
had already achieved these accolades.
1,000%. Doug, it's funny that you say that, Not funny. It's truth that you say that, because in the book, The Ninth Stratum, we've also identified these traits, these 9 traits that high performers exude. And one of them is that quest and that thirst for knowledge. They're always looking for, something to learn, something new, something that they didn't do yet. Just like what Dr. Ruth had in her observation.
Yeah. And the other thing that came to my mind, again, as you were describing the difference of people and how they end up kind of falling out in life, if you will. I've talked about this on the show before in the 2008 timeframe when we had the big colossal financial crash and high unemployment numbers. People that had been lifelong career professionals had been given pink slips for the first time ever in their whole career. I and some partners created a nonprofit to coach and help people find a new and more modern strategy for finding a new job, even in a bad economy. And we set up this organization and did some training and had huge numbers attending because unemployment was very high. It was not uncommon for us to have 200 or 300 people at every weekly workshop we did.
Sure.
And after some months of experience, I, being an old banker and an analyst at heart in many ways, I said, we've got to study our numbers. How are we doing? What are we doing?
Right.
And we had kept track of every individual. We had a little bit of a reporting system. And I ran the analysis, and lo and behold, we had a 66%, right on the nose, 66% success rate of people finding jobs. Well, I don't know about you, but my
Pretty
initial
good.
thought, well, I was self-critical. I said, this is terrible. We can't. This is not high enough. We need to figure out what we're missing here.
Oh,
And we started analyzing literally row by row the individuals. We knew the stories, and we started sort of categorizing. And lo and behold, what came out was we actually had 3 buckets. We had a group of people that came to our program eager, hungry, willing, and soaked up everything we were doing like sponges. Immediately went out and did our exercises, did our steps, did our process. We even had one lady that came to us and got a primer of the whole program, but we had a 6-step program we were doing, and we would unfold it over a 6-week course. But she came right in the middle of that cycle, and she grabbed the cheat sheet for the other 5 pieces that she hadn't yet done, and dove into it. And it was all on our website so she could study it. She went out, and when she came back the next week, she had reported she had landed a job in 48 hours.
wow. Wow.
And that was the all-time high. But the point being, very eager, very adaptive, very pliable, moldable, willing. And that was one group. That was our A plus group, if you're going to put a label on it. And we'll talk about labels in a minute. But then the middle group was successful. But when we tracked them, what we discovered was they were a little more hesitant, a little more, I don't know,
Hmm.
maybe okay. You sure about this? All right, well, I'll go do it. And they did, and they were successful. Then we had our third group. And these were the folks that we could very vividly remember coming to our meetings, and often, even in the middle of a speaker, they would stand up and say, I don't believe that. You're wrong.
Wow.
That doesn't work. You can't do that. And or when we were kind of coaching them one on one, they were very bitter. They were angry about being let go. They were frustrated. They were many things. And sure enough, this when we did that analysis, we had a third, a third, and a third. Put the first 2 groups together, success, 66% on the nose. The last group, no result.
Unbelievable. What's funny about that, Doug, is, when you look at our performance-based skills, there are two that stand out that which made that 66% successful. One is coachability, and the other one is open-mindedness. These are two performance-based skills that you can be taught, learned, applied, and improved. Those people had that. And because they were coachable and because they were open-minded to new things, look what happened, right?
Right. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And we went on, we ran the organization for about 3 years as the markets started stabilizing, and the numbers really never changed. And that's how it stood. And I've subsequently, not to digress here, but I've subsequently thought about that in my own, leadership coaching I do with people. And often when I hear people saying, I've got this situation on my team, I've got this group that does this, the middle group, and then I've got the third group. And it's really interesting how that plays out in real life at work.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more discussion we can get into about that on another day. But
Yeah. And Doug, that comes down, it comes down to two things. We do a lot of seminars, and we do like these performance strategy sessions. Like you, we have 9 of them, right, that take you through the spectrum of human performance. But there are two things we can't give to people: desire and effort, right? Without desire to improve and putting the effort forth to make the improvement happen, these people aren't getting out of the starting gate. And that's, where you see that lower rung of potential low performance, or just people who are stuck in the mud.
mhm. The other thing I want to ask you about, you talked about this high performance in not just work but in life as well. And I think we all know that sometimes when you look to the sports world, you'll see an athlete out on the, you mentioned Tiger Woods out on the golf course, Michael Jordan on the basketball court, name a football player you highly regard. Sport has been a high level of success, but their personal life, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
You're
know,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And
Um,
you kind of wonder. I've always said, and I want to be clear. I'm not trying to judge. I've loved everything Tiger Woods did for the game of golf, but from the early years of watching him and hearing his backstory, I told friends and colleagues, he's going to break some records, but he's not going to do what he could do because he's wound too tight.
yeah. Yeah. He is wound pretty tight, to be honest with you. That is,
And and I that was an observation and really not more of a judgment. And for me, quite honestly, I was a little sad about it when I kind of figured that out, because I did admire what he was doing and how he was going about it. And there's, everybody's got a Tiger Woods story they might want to tell, but um, it you do wonder if the focus on the performance for the thing you're out there doing does undermine the personal life. And there's a classic tool in coaching. It's got a lot of different names. Most of us call it the wheel of life. It's a pie chart that you got sometimes 6, sometimes 8 slices, however you want to define it. But we encourage people to grade themselves on where they are in each one of those sectors. And more than half of the chart is non-work related. It's
yeah.
health, physical health, spiritual health, financial, family, friends, hobbies, those kinds of things. And the argument being, if your wheel's not well rounded, you're going to have a bumpy ride in life.
1,000%. And, part of our curriculum and part of the framework is that balance. When we look at the 5 categories of human performance, that last category is what everybody misses. When we do these exercises in these sessions, right? Everybody forgets about the personal health aspect of human performance. Personal appearance. And that's just not it's not how you look, it's how you're showing up, right? How you're preparing to present yourself to the world. You have sleep quality, massive impact on your daily performance, purposeful nutrition, physical activity, and mental well-being. These are all the things that we tend to forget about when we're grinding through our careers, trying to get to that next level. And so our whole approach is really about a balance, because if you're balanced, then you see it across both of your career and your life. And you're not, sitting there, really failing at one and doing great at another.
Hmm. So very true, I think. And what are some of the things you do with either individuals or teams to introduce this? And I like to say or ask, what are some first steps when a CEO calls you and says, "I think I want you to come talk to my people"?
Yeah, we do a deep dive on the leadership itself. We do a small introduction to the framework because we do want the leaders involved too. Most of these leaders focus on results, but few of them understand how to build repeatable behaviors that produce better results, across the people and the systems and the culture. And so we like to look at, certain groups within organizations, whether it's the marketing group, the sales group, whatever it might be. And we have the leadership look at the performance-based skills that they believe matters most to being high performing in the role. And albeit there are 45 performance-based skills, and that sounds like a very daunting number, we don't have to be high performing in all of them. What we
Mhm.
want to be is high performing in the ones that are critical to our role in our career and critical to our life. And if we're high in some and low in the other, that's okay. But when you look at a role, you can literally pick out the specific skills that matter to the high performers in that role across the spectrum of human performance. So we usually start there. And our introductory session is exactly this. We introduce high performance. We define, we have the teams and the audience define it. We then make them come up with the skills that measure high performance and that high performers exude. So it's a journey we take them through as a foundational piece. And then once they understand that and they understand the language of the 9 strands of performance, then we go into the human performance aspect of it. So like session 2 is all about routine, habits, and discipline. And we go through this thing called the 5 daily wins of performance. And when we looked at high performers from all walks of life, there was one thing that all of them did. They all had this morning routine that was sacred. They all woke up at the bell. There wasn't any like snooze buttons. They valued their sleep. They got in their personal physical exercise. They got in their personal development. They were purposeful with their nutrition, what they were putting in their bodies, and they didn't buy into distractions before that work bell hit. That time was their time, and it was precious to them. They were selfish during that time. And so they weren't on emails. They weren't on social media. They weren't watching the news. They were focused on their own personal improvement. And so we boiled that down to 5 daily wins, and we go through the science and mechanisms of why these wins are important. By the way, the whole framework around the 9th stratum is built on the science of human biology, human physiology, and psychology, because when we look at performance, achievement isn't something that is equated to, the individual and the innate skills. Achievement, what we see, is based on the individual's understanding of the mechanisms of their own body. How do we use our body and our mind to gain the competitive edge, to improve our performance? And that's what this whole thing is built on. So, we don't stand up here on stage and say, do this because we did it and we're successful. We do it because, like, hey, do this because this is how your body is primed and ready for this action or focus, right? And this is how your mind works. And this is how the psychology of human behavior works. And when they take that and they begin to apply it, they go, oh my God, life changing. Like it starts out like that. And so we take them through routine, habits, and discipline. We then go into like how we're showing up for ourselves, for our teams, for our families, like the science of perceptual judgment. We go into relationship building. We go into management of emotions, all the way through till to decision making and how we use our business brain versus our emotional brain or our lizard brain. And the last session caps it off. Everything builds upon each other, but the last session caps it off with visionary thinking, and why visionary thinking isn't just for the heads of organizations. Everybody should be and can be a visionary thinker, and why that's important to progression and growth.
On that last point, another anecdotal experience through my years in coaching, I have often asked clients, because I'm frequently dealing with mid and upper leaders in large companies, and I will ask them, they might be a director or VP or something, and I'll say, what's your vision for your unit, your domain, I call it. And I was surprised, have been surprised at how often the answer is, don't really have one. I'm kind of waiting on orders from above.
Right.
And so I always challenge that thinking. I tell them, well, what would it look like if you could cast your own vision? I know it has to be contextual. It has to be in the context of what is coming down from above or what your boss is directing. But translate all of that, which is usually in higher corporate speak, and translate it into more executable chunks that your team can actually fulfill. What would that vision look like?
Right.
And
Right.
and they start thinking and they go, holy crap, yeah, I can do that. And you know I may be invited to help them through some of that process, but it's kind of this aha moment when they go, yeah, I could really have my own vision of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
would be good. This would be good.
Absolutely. We do this exercise in the visionary thinking session in the beginning where we say to everyone, why is it important that the people or person at the reception desk of an organization is a visionary? And they go, I don't know. And then it filters out like, well, it's about the client engagement. It's the first thing the client sees. So what is their vision for how we receive our best people, our clients, our new hires, right? What's that look like? That's why that person needs to be in that visionary thinking mindset. And then how to get into that mindset is very important too. How to use your default mode network of your brain to get into that creative space and think outside the box and think without boundaries versus being in that very analytical brain where we sort of put ourselves into boxes and boundaries.
Yeah. I think it's that thinking that has that self-applied judgment that gets people stuck with, classic description is imposter syndrome. I
Yes.
have this fear of what I'm supposed to be doing. I just got promoted, and oh my gosh, what if they find out what I don't
Find
know
out.
yet?
Right. Right.
But
Right.
so often it is that mindset. It's that whatever script or video you've got playing in your head. Maybe it goes all the way back to third grade. You're not fast enough. You're not tall enough. You're not pretty enough. Whatever that feed loop was, that horrible programming that might get applied. It's funny how those things resurface in adult lives. And I think if I heard your original point right, the mindset work. Some people say, "Yeah, you're going to talk to me about mindset." That's woo woo. I don't want to, mess with that. Well, it, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
If you're not thinking in the right direction and processing the data that's coming at you and the experiential learning that might be around you, if you're not processing that well, you're going to be prone to fall back into those old programming habits.
1,000%. And with mindset too, part of our curriculum we teach is how to take control of the brain, the neuroscience behind that, and how to begin to establish these neural pathways of positive thought, whether it be through morning mantras, whether it be through exercise itself leads to these neurotransmitters that are just so positive for the brain and lead to that energy and that focus and that positive outlook on things. So there are things that we talk about a lot when it comes to establishing a mindset, making it repeatable, because what we want to actually achieve is a mindset habit. We want to construct a mindset habit so that there are no thoughts of fear or failure anymore. It's all about, and if they do come into play, they're immediately, tampered down.
Hmm.
So that's also a very important part of what we dive into.
On the notion of fear and risk, I had another guest that talked about the mental strength of being able to deal with those, and one of the ways he described it was trying to assess your relationship, because risk is going to be around us in everything we do one way or another. You're inevitably going to identify some elements of fear, because number one of the primary purposes of the brain is to protect us and keep us safe and
Yep.
alive. So there's a fear element that can be an indicator there. So his challenge was, again, we're back to mindset, is what's your real relationship with those? Do you give in to that, or do you master that?
Yeah. It's something to be said, Doug, when it comes to emotions, especially fear. You know, the one thing that we don't teach is to ignore emotions. Emotions are important. We need to understand what we're fearing, where the stimulus is coming from, why that is happening to us. But to make judgments off of it, to make decisions off of it, to let it direct us in life, that's where we got to stop. That's the critical point where we need to be able to understand the emotion, but then move into that executive function part of the brain where we go into the critical thinking and we go into the problem solving and how are we going to move through this thing, because our brains are prediction machines. It's what they do. And, we can sit here and spike our anxiety by predicting things that we don't even have any control over, that may not even happen in our future. And if we can control that, man, life's a little bit different.
Actually, had a client once. We were talking about all this, and she was describing, a real struggle. And as we had a couple of sessions, and she came back to me one day and she said, I've literally begun thinking about this like the cartoon, the angel and the devil on my shoulder,
Yeah.
talking in
Yeah.
my ear. And she said, I got to tell you, she said, I was in a meeting the other day and I could feel those little guys, popping up. And she said, in my mind, I just thumped the devil off my shoulders. She said, I just, got rid of him. And she said, it was all fine. She said, it was great. And I said, well, good for you. That's a great metaphor. If it works for you, wonderful. And that's the exact point. You
Yeah.
have to find that way to turn off that negativity and that distracting energy that comes from all of that, because it's not productive. And if you've been there before and seen that movie, you don't need to see it again. So
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, the average person cannot do that without some sort of coaching. Like, you have to be really good to get to a point in your life where you have, without outside influence, found ways and mechanisms to control your own mind. It's hard. So I give people a lot of credit that put the effort forth. But when you get into these group settings and you get into these coaching sessions and stuff, you really find out some tactical ways of thinking about things. Like you had mentioned, imposter syndrome. And that is something that affects a ton of high performers, you know,
Mhm.
in the job. And they have this idea that they faked it till they made it, you know, and you have to look at them and say, wait a second, time out. You can only fake it so far. You're here for a reason. The organization puts you here because you have specific talents that they want to extract so that you can move things forward. You're a difference maker, and you begin to talk in that tone to say, yeah, you could think that you got here because you faked it. Maybe you did, but now you're here. What are you going to do? And
Right.
what is what is that negative thought going to do for you positively? It's nothing. It's not going to move you forward, right?
Right.
So always forward.
What I always encourage my clients to think about is one thing I've learned talking to some people that are into rock climbing, mountain climbing. There's a principle about 3 points on the mountain. Always have 3 points of contact, and I I tell leaders to think about that. 1 point of contact is what you just said. No, you got selected for this role. There were people that believe in you and think you're the right choice. That's one of your contact points.
Yeah.
And look around for other things that you have already achieved, that you have proven performance. That's another contact point. And then you can look for your third one, whatever that may be. And maybe it's your skill, maybe it is your plan that moving forward, or your vision for what you want to do. But don't let go of those contact points, and keep climbing. And
1,000%.
so that seems to kind of break out of that sort of imposter thinking, because anytime, every time, at least for all of my clients that have expressed it. Oh, and by the way, when somebody brings that to me, my very first thing I'll say, congratulations, you're not alone.
It's lonely at the top.
And
Yeah.
and I've had a few clients go, really? I thought it was just me. And I go, oh, no, 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 no. I said, if everybody told their true story, I'm going to venture that just almost anybody in a corporate structure hierarchy has had a moment of thinking that way for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah, and
I think it's just natural.
and it's a result of like those emotions, right? We've all seen brilliant people make terrible decisions under pressure, right? And the problem isn't their intelligence, it's the untrained emotional regulation that they might have, or their that imposter syndrome coming into play. And so we really want to focus on that, because that affects everything, decision making and how we're moving organizations forward.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
Aaron, this has been great. I really appreciate you sharing this. Tell folks the best way to get in touch with you.
yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Ninth Stratum. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and the book is on Amazon. You can find it there, and we also have an audio book, which has some special end of chapter Q&A sessions with my business partner, Kelly Johnson.
Great. Well, as always, folks, we'll have that information in the show notes. So when you get to a safe place, if you're listening on a streaming platform right now, check out the links, and you'll get a hold of Aaron. So one last time, Aaron, thank you, man. This has been great. Really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you, Doug. This was awesome.
All right. Well, folks, if you need to get hold of me, my website is simply dougthorpe.com. I've got a lot of offerings over there. Certainly happy to do an exploratory session with you, and no charge, no hard sell. We'll just talk about your situation, see what's going on. And don't forget, we have a video version of this show on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Check out the archives and leave us a comment and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye. Go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.